Well, good morning. Welcome to a beautiful, beautiful June day. Those of you worshiping with us at our campuses and those of you who follow us faithfully on live stream, I'm just so pleased that we get to jump into part two, the second installment of our series this weekend. So it's June, and as you move into summer, it's kind of like wedding season. Some of you will be going to weddings for maybe children, nieces, nephews, friends, the children of friends, maybe your friends. And my children happen to be 30-ish. They're 31, 29, and 28, I think. I don't know. The ages keep moving, you know. I do know their names and the names of their offspring, but they're at the age when a lot of their friends are tying the knot. I mean, and we've known some of their friends since they were like 14, 15 years old before they could drive, you know, and now seeing them with someone in their second half of their 20s and, tying the knot, you know, walking the aisle. And if you were to grab one of these kids and basically say, okay, dude, you know, like, really, what are you looking for? What are you looking for in a wife? He'd say, yeah, I don't know. That's not the truth. He said, gorgeous. I always thought it was gorgeous. And you're kind of thinking, okay, like supermodel gorgeous? Like, who'll go out with you? Yeah. So good luck with that one, right? But ask her, what are you looking for? And she'd go, oh, I don't know. But drill deeper, and it might be, oh, you know, someone with a sense of adventure and spontaneity and excitement, but also just like a really, really good listener. And you're going like, I got it. So kind of a combination between Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks. That's what you're looking for. Someone will get in a fist fight on top of the train, but then be willing to sit in the train and listen with unbroken eye contact for hours at a time. Good luck with that one, right? But utopian ideals aside, you say, okay, listen, what is it you really want? Utopian ideals aside, I think you'd kind of boil this down to, man, I want someone who's dependable. I want someone who's honest. I want someone who's faithful to me. And that's what I hope for you. Whether you are engaged in 23 or whether you are engaged in 63, I hope that you find someone reliable, dependable, honest, faithful. The series is taken from a section of scripture called the Minor Prophets. And the Minor Prophets in the table of contents of the Old Testament here take up the very end of the Old Testament, 12 very short books. And these guys spoke a few hundred years, some of them several hundred years before the time of Jesus. There's one particular guy, that dude right there, Hosea. And Hosea, God comes to this guy, Hosea, and says, hey, I've got an assignment for you. Hosea says, okay. God says, I want you to get married. Hosea says, okay. God says, Hosea, I want you to marry a hooker. Hosea goes, okay. But wait a minute. If she's in the habit of throwing herself at other guys, how do I know she's going to be faithful to me? God says, oh, don't worry about that. She won't be. She won't be at all. In fact, when she goes out in the evening with her friends, you're always going to be wondering a little bit where she really is. She's going to have children. And you're going to look into the faces of those kids. You're going to look into their faces to see if they look like you. Because you're always going to wonder whether or not you're really the dad. And her behavior in chasing other guys, it's not just going to be covert and hidden. It's going to be blatant and open. And the day's going to come where she's going to take off, move in with another guy. And this is what I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask you to track her down. I'm going to ask you to find her. I'm going to ask you to romance her. And I'm going to ask you to bring her back home. Hosea, that's your son. You're wondering why I would ask you to do such a thing? Because I want you to be an object lesson to the people around you of what it feels like to be me, of what it's like to love a people and care for a people and devote myself for a people and to have them treat me like I do not exist. I want your family to be an object lesson of my persistent love for runaway people. Right out of the gate in the book of Hosea, we're hit with this assignment. Hosea chapter 1, verse 2, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go, marry a promiscuous woman, a woman with a history, a woman that throws herself at other guys. Have children with her, for like an adulterous wife, the land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. I want your marriage and what people see, for them to see kind of like what it's me to be the God of the Israelites, to pour myself into them and have them constantly taken off and forgetting that I exist. Now, right about now, some of you are saying, Pastor Manion, I did not know this story was in the Bible. Well, let's just say that because of its adult content, this didn't quite make the children's sermon. If you were raised in Sunday school, this image did not grace the front of your Sunday school paper. But even on an adult level, there's some awkwardness in getting into this topic. I can only imagine what this surfaces in some of you, when you were growing up as a kid, if your family was massively disrupted by unfaithfulness of a parent. As we get into this story, I can just imagine that it could bring back a flood of uncomfortable emotions. And I'm also knowledgeable of the fact that at any given time, there are dozens of couples at Ada Bible Church trying to rebuild trust and rebuild a marriage after trust has been broken. And so just right out of the gate, I just want to say that it is not my intent to open healing wounds. But in looking at this passage of scripture and looking at this prophet and looking at the voice of God we see in it, I think it's an important passage to go to, even if it raises some level of discomfort. And if it raises a level of discomfort, there's a possibility that you might be able to identify uncomfortably with some of the characters in the story. Some of you will even go, I know what that's like. I know what that's like. So the story of Hosea and the incidents involved in his life, looking at them today, it's going to give us an opportunity to recognize that straying from God is serious business. That is, when we turn our backs on God and run, he takes it very seriously. It's like I've become the runaway bride. I've become the unfaithful spouse. So we think that spiritual rebellion, kind of a misdemeanor, it can break the heart of God. And the image that he uses with Hosea of a marriage that's been disrupted through infidelity, so I think we're going to have an opportunity to talk about spiritual drift is a serious deal. But secondly, it gives us the opportunity to talk about God as the persistent lover, as the God who does not quickly give up when people run away, and the lengths to which God can go to try to get us back. And so I think today can hit us on a number of different levels, but particularly for those of you, and you know that you've not only been drifting, you've like turned your back on God and you're racing the other direction. It is my desperate hope for you today that you would be able to soak in this passage of scripture, see that God is the persistent lover that wants you back home. And I hope that for many of you, this is the day that you say, it's time to head back home. That today's the day that you say, it's time to head back home. So the story of Hosea, the incidents of his life that we're going to follow, we're going to kind of unfold them in 3 different scenes. And scene 1, just called it the runaway bride. Scene 1, the runaway bride. Now, to comprehend what's happening in the days of Hosea, we're gonna roll the tape back to an incident that happened hundreds of years before. We're actually gonna look at the marriage. We're gonna visit the wedding. And you can actually identify this on a map. This is Egypt. The Israelites were in slavery in Egypt for generations under the heel of the Egyptian taskmasters to build Pharaoh's supply cities and such. And through the leadership of a shepherd by the name of Moses, God says, Moses, go to Pharaoh and say, what are those famous words? Let my people go. Now, not Moses' people, God's people. God says, tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And they have a series of plagues. They leave Egypt. They go into the desert, somewhere around where that dot is. And they're heading up to an area called Canaan. This was the land of promise. This was the land promised to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so they're leaving the land of slavery. They're heading to the land of promise. But here in the desert, it's like God says, okay, stop. We gotta settle something here between us. Because in Egypt, you'd worship one God for the sun, another God for the earth, another God for the Nile River. It was like here a God, there a God, everywhere a God, type thing. And so there in the desert, God says, okay, let's solve something, let's settle something here. I am a unity. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. There's one God. And then he says, we need to come up with some relational rules, and 10 of them, in fact, we don't call these the relational rules, we call these the 10 commandments, right? And so commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. It's like commandment number 1 in the desert, let's get something straight. I want to be your one and only God. I want to be your one and only God. And scholars have frequently given this marriage language. It's like a groom looking across at a bride and saying, I take you, will you be my wife? I take you to be my wife. And like the bride looking across at the groom and saying, I take you to be my husband. And it's kind of like no other guys, right? I mean, no other guys, right? You shall have no, and so when God says to the Israelites, I will be your God, will you be my people? And they say, we will be your people, please be our God. It's like this marriage ceremony. And they were gonna be incredibly challenged in remaining faithful to this marriage. I mean, as far as the Israelites and God were concerned, it's kind of like the bride is standing there and she's looking over, checking out one of the groomsmen and kind of like going, call me later. You know, and that's the challenge. I mean, back to the map, they're gonna head up into Canaan, and Canaan had a deity there that was credited with the fertility of the land. And the deity was a guy by the name of Baal. This is his museum statue of a Baal idol that they've found. And notice the hand up in the air is not giving the Boy Scout oath. The hand up in the air is throwing a lightning bolt. Baal would be God of the rain, God of the storms. And so in Canaan, just understand something. When they get to Canaan, there was competition for who to offer your heart to, who to offer your sacrifices to, and who to offer your praise to if you desired to have grain, to feed your family bread, if you desired to have flocks, if you desired to have herds, if you desired for the grapes to grow and the figs to grow. And so one voice was saying like, you shall have no other gods. I want to be your one and only God. And the other voice is, there's a Baal statue right down the road. Maybe if I run over to the Baal temple and offer some food to that idol or a sacrifice, maybe the rain will fall and my crops will grow. And so, spoiler alert, I mean, the Israelites were just this downhill slope of following this idol Baal. And so what happens in Hosea is that God takes this Baal worship and paints it in marriage terms of a runaway bride. So this verse in chapter 2, verse 5, she is Israel, she said, I will go after my lovers, meaning the other gods like Baal, who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil, and my drink. I will trust Baal to make sure that my crops grow and my herds increase. Pass a house in Israel during the days of Hosea, and there's a mealtime prayer going on with a family. Put your ear to their windowsill and hear the mealtime prayer. Give thanks to Baal, for he is good. His love endures forever. From his hands come our crops. From his hands come this meal that we eat. And it's like God is saying to the Israelites, you're seeing somebody, aren't you? It's like in marriage terms. So Hosea, I got a question. His wife, the woman he marries, her name is Gomer. Mistake number one, marrying a woman named Gomer. Where's Gomer this evening? She's out. Hosea, what does she hope to get from this? Well, these guys give her stuff. These guys give her money, and these guys give her food, and these guys give her olive oil. But Hosea, you're her husband. That was your job. You're right. That was my job. And so when the Israelites chase after Baal, it's like God saying, whoa, wait a minute. We had an agreement. The term is covenant. We had a covenant. We had a binding agreement. That's my job. Now, the term for what they were up to, the term is idolatry. In the word idolatry, we have the word idol, and it's basically trusting in something other than God to be God to us. And some real work we have this morning is that I think that our idolatry, our idol worship, that is the counterfeit gods that we worship, it's more insidious, it's harder to spot, it takes more insight to recognize when we have a counterfeit God or a substitute God. I guess what I'm saying is the Israelites, they knew when they had gone to a Baal temple, offered sacrifices to Baal, and worshiped, bowed down in front of Baal. They knew when they had done that. Something, like making a career our God, or money our God, or another person our God, I think it's harder to discern when we are in the process of doing that. And so I think I will serve you well today, not if you simply go, yeah, there are people who worship idols and there are people who don't. I believe that the heart is an idol factory. And I believe that we're constantly looking for God's substitutes. And I think you would be served well if I help you identify where your idols might be, rather than simply going, yeah, there's idol worship, yeah, don't do that. Try to figure out where they are. So I've been overdosing on this guy named Tim Keller, pastor of a church in New York City recently. And in his book, Counterfeit Gods, he says this. He says, listen, an idol is anything we look at and we say in our heart of hearts, if I have what? If I have that, name it, person, position, a career, educational level, degree, whatever. If I have that, then I'll feel my life has meaning. Then I'll know that I have value. And then I will feel significant and secure. My question to you is this: when your heart is seduced away from the God and his son Jesus, who made it their job to give you value, significance, security, to give meaning, when you embrace a substitute God, what is that for you? If I have that, then I will have made it. Then life will be worth living. Then I'll finally have value. Then I'll finally have meaning. Then I'll have significance. Then I'll be secure as a person. And God whispers, I already got that job. And my friends, this can be anything. Here's a partial list here. This can be my career. It can be beauty. It can be a savings account. It can be my kids or my grandkids. It can be endless pursuit of recreation. It can be education. It can be success in business. It can be anything. And you look at that list and you go, Jeff, many of those things, those are not bad things. Those are good things. I mean, a career, savings account, and education, those are good things. Here's the insidious nature of idolatry. It's idolatry, it's idol worship when I take something good and make it God. When I take my ability to work hard and earn an income, and suddenly I go to my savings account or my portfolio or my earning capacity, and I go, you are my security, you are my safety, now I have meaning, now I have value because of that. Idol worship happens when I take something good and I make it, help me here, I take something good and I make it God. It's kind of like, yeah, business success can be awesome, but when you begin to turn to it as now I have value, now I have meaning, now I'm significant, now I'm secure, the heart is an idol factory. And so just as you look at that list, it could have tripled the list. It added all kinds of other things to it. Relevance, another person, a romantic interest. If I have him, if I have her, if I have that, once we get out of this stinking apartment and into that house, then we will feel like we've arrived. And God says, listen, I got that. I already got that job. I already got that job. And so as you just kind of scan this list and think of a dozen other things that can be on it, it's possible to take athletic ability and turn our sport into the thing that gives us value and meaning in life. And we take something good and we make it God. And listen, these will always let you down. When you embrace it as your God, as the meaning of your life, these will always let you down. And so if you're looking at the story, kind of like, let me get this right. The Israelites leave Egypt. God rescues them from slavery in Egypt. You're right. And they move, and they get the covenant in the desert. That's correct. And they move up into Canaan, the land. Some of you know what this is called. It's called the land flowing with milk and honey. I can't believe that if they moved there and they just kept worshiping Baal and crediting Baal, I can't believe God will continue to bless them. Well, that's the next movement of the story. The next scene 2, he won't. Scene 2 is the drought. And in chapter 2, God speaks to the people as the runaway bride and basically says, do not expect that the grain will continue to grow. Do not expect that your crops will continue to prosper. If you are serving Baal and worshiping Baal, I will shut this down. And so what we have is just an image here of just a cracked earth. God says, don't put it past me. And in clear and unambiguous terms, chapter 2, I believe starting around verse 9, therefore I will take away my grain when it ripens and the new wine when it is ready. I will take back my wool and my linen intended to cover her naked body. And then the next, I will punish her for the days she burned, here we go, incense to the Baals. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers, but she, powerful words, but she what? But me she what? Me she forgot, declares the Lord. Hosea, I want you to do something. I want you to marry someone who's gonna run all over the place on you. And in watching you and her, people in this country, I want them to get the idea that's what it's like to be God. That's what it's like to be God. But understand, I'm about ready to bring a drought. You wanna worship the Baal program, keep working the Baal program. Let's see how this works out for you. And I will stop the rain. In his book, Counterfeit Gods, Tim Keller talks about how we take something good and we make it God, and then it's disappointing, and then it can be absolutely devastating. Now, a couple months ago, I think it was exactly 2 months ago, we were going through that series, Reason to Believe, and we're talking about a conversation Jesus had with a woman beside a well. Do any of you remember that story? Jesus is traveling, he's tired, sits down by a well. There's a woman from another ethnic group, Samaria. He asks her for a drink of water. And while we were in that study together, we talked about the inevitability of taking something that isn't God and making it God, and how inevitably it will let us down. And there's a quote that I want to read again. And this guy is not a Christian, not a believer. I don't think he had a strong faith life. He's a novelist by the name of Richard Foster Wallace. He's an award-winning, best-selling postmodern novelist. And Wallace was speaking to a graduation ceremony. It happened to be a college called Kenyon College. And he was telling the graduates, be careful what you worship. Because when you worship something, it will eat you alive. And so read this a couple months ago, but just wanted to circle back to it. This is what Wallace said in his graduation address. He says, if you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before your loved ones finally plant you. Worship power, and you will end up feeling weak and afraid. You will need even more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you'll end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. And this isn't a guy with a Jesus worldview. He's just saying when you take something and you elevate it as your God and you attribute worship to it, if you say, if only I have you, then I'll be enough. He says, man, it doesn't matter whether this is intellect or power or money or beauty, it will eat you alive. And often God can send a drought. You know that, right? God can send a drought. Earlier when we had that list of things, and I said, yeah, try to identify, the heart is an idol factory. Try to identify what you might turn to. And there were probably some of you that went, oh boy, I know exactly what it is. And some going, yeah, I don't have a clue. Often our idols will be exposed to us when they are threatened. When a job gets threatened and we feel there is not simply some apprehension, not simply a bit of anxiety, but runaway anxiety, fear, we begin to slip into a panic. If you feel that something is about to slip away, like you might lose something, and immediately you feel like, if I lose that, my life is over. It's like this siren should be going off in our brain, just going like, okay, alert, 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 alert. It's possible that I took something good and made it God. Often we only identify our idols when we are in the process of losing them or fearing that we're gonna lose them. When we lose a job, when the athlete who has made a sport their God tears an ACL and the doctor looks at him and says, I don't think you're gonna be playing volleyball anymore. I don't think you're gonna be running track anymore. And all of a sudden they go, my life is over. Now, in such a moment of losing something, disappointment is legitimate. Particularly if it's losing a person in our life. My goodness, losing a child, losing a spouse, losing a brother or sister prematurely. Grief can be intense. And there can be this moment where life as we knew it indeed is over. But if that feeling persists and grows and deep depression sets in, the kind of depression that goes, why do I even go on living now that I don't have that? Because if I don't have that, I don't have anything. And I think God would whisper, anything? You lost that and you don't have anything? My hope for myself, my hope for you is that in a season of loss, we would come to a point where in agony and deep disappointment, we would be able to say, God, but I still have you. Who have I in heaven but you? I'm disappointed and I'm lost and I'm disoriented and I don't know what's next. But you are my hope. You are my security. You are my sufficiency. You are my meaning. I have lost something very valuable, but I did not lose my purpose and meaning in life because I still have you. Once again, often we discern what an idol is when it gets threatened or we're in the process of losing it. And we just have an opportunity to step back and go, you know something? I never would have thought that was an idol to me, but apparently the level that I am feeling this at and the length of time, I think I put way too much stock in that. Movement number 2, God sends a drought. And just as we're looking at that image of the kind of the cracked earth, some of you are going, okay, preacher, that right there is why I stopped going to church 13 years ago. There's this vindictive God. He waits for you to step out of line. He blasts you. I don't think that's what's going on here. I think what's going on here is that the Creator desperately longs to have his people back, to have their hearts back, to show them the futility of worshiping a Baal statue. He will take extreme measures in order to get them back. And so if your first opinion or impression or objection is, yeah, God of vengeance, I've had enough of that, I would plead with you to hold on to that objection for a minute so we see what happens next. Hosea, how's it going? It's over. She's not only fooling around, she has packed her bags, moved out, and she moved in with somebody else. It's over, it's done. God says, Hosea, I got an assignment for you. Okay, last one was kind of strange. Next one's gonna be stranger. I want you to find out where she is, who she's living with. And I want you to go to that guy's place. I want you to track her down. And I want you to romance her. And I want you to bring her back home. Can you explain to me why you would have me do such an insane thing? Yes, because in your relentless pursuit of your runaway bride, I want people to be able to see my heart to track down my people who have run away and to try to get them to come back home. I want people to see in your pursuit of Gomer, my pursuit of my people. I want people to see that I am the persistent lover. Movement 3, the persistent lover, Hosea chapter 3, verse 1, the Lord said to me, go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. In the next verse, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. Yeah, I got no clue. Apparently, sacred raisin cakes had something to do with Baal worship, so let's figure that one out on your own time. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cake. I want you to find her. I want you to track her down. I want you to find her. I want you to romance her. I want you to talk her into coming home. Why in the world would I do that? Because I want these people to have a living illustration that I am the persistent lover. I am the God that is in pursuit. Now, there's a little bit of a complication. Marriage in Old Testament Eastern culture, if you wanted to propose to somebody, you didn't go to the girl and say, will you marry me? In Eastern culture, you don't go to the girl, you go to the girl's dad, the girl's family, and say, I'd like to marry your daughter. And the father kind of looks at you and goes, how badly do you want her? Because I'm thinking maybe 1 cow and 4 goats I could part with my daughter. And it was a bride price. And you literally buy the bride from the family. If I'm understanding the text correctly, whoever Gomer has run off with owns her now. And in order for Hosea to romance her and get her back home, he's got to pay for her all over again. Verse 2, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and an lethek of barley. Silver coins and commodities. I paid for her, I bought her 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. This is the day that Hosea tracks her down, finds out who she's hooked up with now, says, I want her back. They agree on a price, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 shekels of silver. But there's more. How much barley? A homer and a lethek of barley. That's a lot of barley. Now, it's notoriously challenging to find out representative weights and measures from something over 2,000 years ago. But study Bible that I was looking at here estimated a homer and a lethek of barley as being around 430 pounds of barley. Now, this right here, this bag of grain is roughly 4 or 5 pounds. So imagine about 100 of these things. This is going to feed somebody's family for a long time. The image here is that Hosea plants the barley, cultivates the barley, harvests the barley, threshes the barley, winnows the barley, stores the barley, and then gets 430 pounds of barley to show up at this dude's house to get her back. 15 shekels of silver. 400 pounds of grain he pays in order to get Gomer back. The message should not be lost on us. Well, if Hosea is in this moment where he goes, you have got to be kidding me. Do you know how hard I worked for that and that? God, why? God says, because restoration is costly and restoration will cost me something. Restoration will cost me something. And what we should be hit with here, impressed with here, jarred by here, is that God is so intent on chasing down rebels and bringing them home that he'll pay to get us back. It will cost him something. Now, this Hosea story, this is not the only time this image is given to us in Scripture. Luke chapter 15 is the life and ministry of Jesus. And Jesus is at this time where he's eating, dining, hanging out with a group of people. It's just called tax collectors and sinners. And there are some people who are on the morally straight and narrow who see Jesus hanging out with them, and they go, why in the world is he eating and hanging out with those people? And in Luke chapter 15, Jesus tells 3 stories to answer the question with 3 stories. And one of the stories is about a shepherd who comes home in the evening and one of his lambs is gone, and it's like out caught in some ravine or some valley somewhere, and the shepherd leaves the rest of the sheep with a family and friends and trucks out into the night in order to find this lamb. And when he finds a lost lamb, he hoists it onto his shoulders and he carries it back to his village. And when he gets back to his village, he wakes his neighbors up and he says, hey, stop. Have a celebration with me because this lamb was lost and I found it and I brought it back home. What's Jesus saying here? He's saying God is in pursuit. He's not talking here about livestock. He's talking about people that lose their way. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. In that same chapter, Luke chapter 15, there's a story about a woman who has 10 coins and she loses one of her coins and she turns her house upside down to find this lost coin. She lights a lamp, she sweeps the floor, she looks for it, and finally, she finds this valued coin. And she too calls her neighbors together and says, rejoice with me because this coin was lost and I found it. Jesus didn't tell that story to talk about lost money. He told that story to talk about lost people. And this woman looking under every couch and chair and bed, and did it roll into a corner? This woman is on a search and rescue mission for this coin. And Jesus would be able to say 4 chapters later in Luke chapter 19, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost, to seek and to save. I am on a search and rescue mission for people who lose their way. It's the Hosea Gomer story all over again, that God is the persistent lover who tries to track us down and get us back home. The third story in Luke chapter 15 that Jesus tells is the story of the prodigal son. It's a kid that comes to his dad, demands half the inheritance in advance before his dad kicks off. It says he runs to a faraway country and wastes the money on pretty wild living. He ends up broke, he ends up in rags, and there's this moment where he says, I will return to my father. He says he came to his senses and he looks at himself and he smells himself and he goes, my dad's servants live better than I'm living. They eat better than I'm gonna go back home and I'm gonna say, Dad, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Just treat me like a household slave. At least I'll have something to eat. And the dad sees him in the distance and the dad races down the road to embrace his pathetic kid. That's the third story that Jesus tells in that passage. The dad throws a party, calls the neighbors, calls the village together and said, my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And it's the Hosea transaction all over again. It's the persistence of God to bring back home his runaway kids, or in the Hosea story, to bring back home the runaway bride. The human condition is so messed up, and our rejection of God and our search for substitute gods, counterfeit gods, so severe that when God comes to this planet in human form, he would pay for us with more than silver and a homer and lethech of barley. To his friends living in and around the city of Ephesus, Paul wrote these words, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 7, in him we have redemption. Redemption means to buy. He's saying God bought you. In him we have redemption through what? 2 words. His blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's what? Of God's grace. A conversation about the grace of God is a conversation about that aspect of God's character that is wildly generous. A conversation about God's grace is a conversation about that aspect of his being that gives and gives and gives. Hosea, I want you to do something. I want you to find her. I want you to track her down. And I want you to pay some silver and some barley in order to get her back. There is a cost to restoration. And the cost that God pays in himself to bring us home was Jesus hanging on a cross for us. In him we were bought. We have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches, the wealth of God's grace, his capacity to give and to give and to give. I have only one thought as we turn our hearts toward a time of communion together. The top of the message, I said that maybe this is the day where just someone says, I'm coming home, man, I'm coming home. Dude, you talk about idols letting us down and eating you alive. You have no idea. The story of Hosea and the runaway bride is the story of the persistent lover. It is a story of God in pursuit who just keeps whispering, come back home. Come back home, come back home. The prodigal son comes to his senses and says, I will return to my father. Some of the most powerful words you can whisper this morning, if you have been on the run, simply those words. Today, I'm headed home. Whisper them with me right now, everyone. Ready? Today, I'm headed home. Say it one more time. Today, I'm headed home. I'm going to pray for us, and let me ask our worship teams to come up in each room, and also our campus pastors or room hosts, and they will lead us step by step in communion together. Gracious God, I give thanks that we had the privilege, unspeakable privilege, of looking at this story of your compassion today. May it draw our hearts back to you in Jesus' name.